Welcome to the Local Media and Me, which is the first event in the Building the Local News Ecosystem Project series produced by WSLR with support from the Florida Humanities Council. My name is Maria Vesperi, and I will be moderating this event as the designated humanities scholar for the project. I'm a cultural anthropologist and a professor at New College of Florida, where I teach both anthropology and journalism and sponsor our award-winning student newspaper, The Catalyst. So let's get started. Our first presenter, panelist, is Dawn Kitterman, an investigative journalist and local government reporter for the Bradenton Times. Dawn took on a non-traditional career route, which is very interesting, coming to journalism by way of citizen activism. After running multiple Facebook groups aimed at engaging the community on matters of local government, she wrote an in-depth investigative piece on the collapse of the photo gypsum stack at Piney Point, and all of you will remember that. The publication was so impressed with her work that its editor offered her an internship, which she completed ahead of schedule before going on to become a full-time member of the staff. Dawn's work focuses primarily on watchdogging Manatee County government. So, excellent role model. So, Dawn.
Thank you. Is this on?
Yes.
All right. Well, thank you, everybody, for attending, as Maria said. So she shared a little bit about how I got started. Let me tell you a little bit about the Bradenton Times, if you're not familiar with that publication. It is an independent, online only at this time publication. Obviously, the Bradenton Times, it's a Manatee County based publication. I was offered an internship, as Maria stated, in mid-2021. About 6 months later, as she also stated, I came on full-time, focusing on local county governments. Our main focus at the Bradenton Times is the county government and county commission, but the thing that is unique, I think, about the Bradenton Times is that it was started by a former Manatee County Commissioner. His name is Joe McClash, and he was a county commissioner for 22 years. And in 2009, he felt like he was experiencing, through his work serving as a county commissioner, a bit of, I would say, a bit more influence maybe than he would have preferred in how local issues were being reported. And he felt that maybe sometimes there was too much special influence, perhaps steering which way or another a story might be reported or how it was being reported, because many times private news outlets and such they're dependent on ad revenue oftentimes, especially as the decline in support of local news continues and citizens are not, they're turning their attention to, 24/7 mainstream, on the television news, and so they're focusing on more national issues rather than local issues, and so he was concerned about that. He wanted to fund his own publication, and that's what he does. And so we are truly independent. We're largely self-funded. In the last couple of years since I came on, we did start with a voluntary subscription, and we do seek support from the community, hoping to grow into the future. For speaking even as myself, before I started paying attention to local news, I think I did not understand clearly how much your local government, it's like where the rubber meets the road. That is where our day-to-day lives are impacted. That is where, when we wake up and walk out our door in the morning and drive to our work on our roads and turn on our faucets and all of this, it's so easy to take it for granted because these things are just there. But the decisions that are made around infrastructure and development and our school curriculum and so on and so forth right here in our community is what we really feel more readily than, say, some of the hot button debates on the national level. What they're doing in Washington, D.C. doesn't end up on Manatee Avenue in the same way. And I recognize that, and I had some concern that as local news declines, it seems so does local engagement, and so does transparency in our local governments, accountability in our local governments. And so without the access to the information to know what your local issues even are and what your local governments are doing, it's very hard to be engaged as a citizen because it's overwhelming. It takes a lot of time. We all have lives to do. I mean, I don't know how many of you maybe have watched a county commission meeting in full, but in Manatee County, I mean, it is an all-day commitment. It is 9 a.m. sometimes until 6 or 7 in the evening. And so I saw in the offer of an internship an opportunity to be the one to do that, so I could turn around and share that information with people who couldn't do that all day long. As far as how citizens can play a role, obviously, I too was just a citizen a couple of years ago and not working in this industry. But I think most importantly is consuming your local news, seeking out local news sources, finding the ones that you appreciate their content. Their content is stuff that you feel is important to you, and read it and share it and comment on it, and maybe even when you learn something from it or find find an issue that is of importance to you, go that step further and begin to engage with your local elected officials and your government about your opinions and what you've learned of that. The other difference is in local news, I think it is very hard sometimes to vet our sources and what it is we're consuming, and knowing the difference between what is opinion and what is fact. In terms of in written form. I mean, I think, not underestimating anybody's intelligence, I think in a very basic way, we all know what opinions are and facts are, but when it's put into a format, particularly with the invention of the internet, it can be very hard sometimes to discern what is a sourced true fact publication and what is a publication maybe motivated to another end, or that is sharing more opinionated or slanted biased news rather than just direct straight reporting. My editor, who was going to be here, he is an opinion columnist, and often the difference between what he does and I do is I report as I explained and researched on the issues, and then he will come and kind of break that down, and he will tell you a little bit, the conclusions he's drawing from it, and where my work doesn't do that. And and I think there's a good role for both sorts of reporting, but it's important to understand the difference and the usefulness of either or. Thank you.
Thank you. That's really, really good. Exactly what we want to get at, these important questions. And I think this last point about opinion versus news is something that people can get very frustrated with. So we want to probe that a bit more. So thank you very much. Really good, Dawn. Next, I'd like to introduce Carrie Seidman, who is an opinion columnist and the dance critic for the Sarasota Herald Tribune. She is also the creator, writer, and host of the Facing Mental Illness newsletter and podcast, which features stories from people with lived mental health experience. A graduate of the Columbia University School of Journalism and an award-winning daily newspaper reporter, critic, and columnist for more than 40 years. She previously worked for the New York Times, Los Angeles Herald Examiner, Albuquerque Journal, and Albuquerque Tribune, where she covered a broad range of subjects from sports to arts to mental health, in formats ranging from reviews and features to long-form narratives and investigative enterprise reporting. I understand she has a new book out, and we would welcome a word about that as well. So.
Thank you. Hi, everyone. I'm a last-minute substitute here tonight, so unlike Dawn with her wonderful presentation, I do not have notes prepared. I'll just give you a little bit about my history here in Sarasota and what I try to do currently with the column that I have now. I came to the paper in 2010 because the paper I had been working for in Albuquerque was one of the many great community papers that we've lost over the last decade. Um, and I came here, I made the decision, I had lived in Albuquerque almost 20 years, and it was a big decision to move all the way across the country. And I did so because the paper, the Herald Tribune at that time, was owned by the New York Times regional media group. And I had worked for the Times in New York. They knew me, I knew them. I thought, this is a good, solid thing. I can be assured that, this is an organization that's not going to change. And they're still doing really good community journalism. So I took the leap, I moved across the country, and 3 months later, the New York Times sold all their regional newspapers. And that was the first of 3 changes of ownership over the time that I've been with the Herald Tribune. And each time there was a reduction in staff, there was a reduction in budget, there was increased workload, multiple, single people doing multiple jobs. It just, the whole contraction of the newspaper industry that we're all pretty aware of, and kind of why we're here tonight. I took over the column from a longtime columnist who had, Tom Lyons, who had worked for the paper for 20-some years as the lead city columnist. I took over in 2017. I'm a very different writer than Tom, and I had very different ideas about what I wanted to do with the column. And I came in with pretty rose-colored glasses, thinking that I was going to use this column to unite the community and create harmony and get everyone working together. And I couldn't have picked a worse time in our country's history to do that. But some of those thoughts about what I tried to do with my column are still motivating factors for me. As the newspaper industry has contracted, as we've lost reporters, as many of the reporters at the Herald Tribune now are not people who've lived in the community for very long, are young reporters who are just kind of getting their feet under them as far as reporting goes. I have tried in the column to pick up things that are getting dropped elsewhere, things that I think the community needs to know about. There hasn't been a dedicated county or city commission reporter at the paper for the last year. So there's a lot of opportunities for me to use my column to tell people about things that they may have missed. And while my column is an opinion column, I do a lot of research for my columns. Those of you who've read them know that I'm not the kind of columnist who just writes off the top of my head and spouts off my opinion. I say, this is my opinion, but this is the information I have that brought me to that conclusion. I try to do a bit of explanatory journalism in my columns to explain things that maybe people don't understand if they don't know what a comprehensive plan is, if they don't know what a text amendment is. I try to think about doing something called solutions journalism, which is not just presenting a problem, but presenting how the community might address that problem. Probably one of the more flattering things that someone has said to me since I started the column is, you are the conscience of Sarasota. And I am very humbled by that. I don't by any means think that I am that, but I try to be. I try to remind the community of the things that they may have not considered, the people they may have overlooked, the situations that need attention that aren't being addressed. And I also try to be very accessible to my readers. And I think that's something that we have really lost in the newspaper industry. I said when I started the column that I would respond to anyone who contacted me. And I have tried very hard in every case, whether someone contacted me by email or phone. Both my email and my phone number are at the end of every column I write, and I always respond. And, you know, sometimes it's not a lot of fun because a lot of times you get feedback that's pretty angry or pretty nasty. But I have really, I think if I've done any service to the paper and to the community, it has been maintaining that connection with the community by responding to readers, by going out and talking to local Rotary groups and alumni groups and neighborhood associations, so that they feel like invested in the community and how we're reporting news. And that has allowed me to develop some really great relationships with people within the community who've become wonderful, valued sources for me. And so, yeah, my goal is to break down that wall a little bit between the newspaper and the readership. And when people say that I work for the Herald Tribune, I like to say, not really. I really work for my readers, because while the Herald Tribune may sign my paychecks, my goal is to, you know, educate and inform and provide an accessible person to people in the community who are involved and concerned about the community. So that's just a little bit about what I try to do.
Okay, thank you very much, Carrie. I think this point about accessibility is a really important one. I was a reporter for the Tampa Bay Times in the 1980s and early 90s, and I was also an editorial writer and columnist. And when I worked for that paper, people could just walk in off the street, come up to the floor where the newsroom floor, and tell the receptionist they wanted to see somebody, and either be waved back into the newsroom or one of us would come out. That has changed so much to where, now you really can't get into a newsroom. There were all sorts of barriers, and that's made a huge difference, along with all of these other things that both of our speakers have mentioned. And institutional memory is an important one, people who understand a story in a bigger context, and the steady decrease in local reporting, because that is the first to go. There are stories, you can run a paper by buying things from a news service, and it looks respectable, but inside there's really nothing that you couldn't get somewhere else. So it's the gem of the local news is what needs to be protected. Okay.
Let me just add one thing. If you want to know why I think I'm the accessible person on the paper, because people call me on Sunday mornings when their paper hasn't been delivered and say, your phone number is the only one I can find. Can you help me?
Very good. Okay. Our next presenter is Johannes Werner. I think some of you already know him. He's spent his adult life as a journalist, covering communities large and small, from his hometown in Germany, co-op farmers and unions in Mexico, auto workers in Detroit, the courts in Miami, business in Cuba, and now the place he has called home for more than half his life, Sarasota. Since February of last year, Johannes has been news director here at WSLR. He says he is having the professional time of his life, directing a serious, growing community news organization. So, without further ado, Johannes.
Thank you, Maria. So I'm a product of January 6, 2023, that is. I had been working covering Cuba for many, many years. Since the early 2000s, I did so as a journalist with his own business. I was covering the Cuban economy and business in Cuba, a very special niche nobody else was covering. Quite dysfunctional community, I would argue, but a fascinating beat to cover. However, as of January 6, 2023, this became a luxury that was not tenable anymore for my family, because my wife's job and her institution was under attack. January 6, 2023 was the day when Governor Ron DeSantis announced the takeover of New College. Trustee Christopher Rufo described it as a hostile takeover. Ever since, my wife's life and my family's life has been a little more uncertain. So, when I got the call to join WSLR and a growing community news organization, I jumped on it right away. I have been around WSLR ever since it started. In 2005, I did a public affairs show for 10 years. And I knew the institution. The Fogartyville, is my home away from home. It's my second living room, if not my first one. And so now we're working to create a systematic news coverage, community news coverage for WSLR, the community radio station. I'm building and stepping on a base of many years of commitment and volunteerism. This station has always been committed to covering the local news, but it kind of came in cycles. I don't know if anyone remembers the jumping mullet. There have been many iterations of trying to create news. It always was working with the challenge of not having the kind of consistency a news organization needs. So, correct me if I'm wrong, I'm the first full-time paid person at WSLR who is covering the news here. It's an exciting job, and I'm having the professional time of my life here. I shouldn't say it because they're going to cut my salary. The reason being, this is a news organization that is responding to needs, to local needs. It's responding to a gap that is growing. We do have very good local newspapers. We have a history of good local newspapers, but as Carrie explained, they're shrinking. They continue to shrink. So part of what we're doing is covering the bread and butter. That is county commission, city commission, school board, hospital board, all these good institutions that we need to follow. But we're doing so with a particular angle, and that is working people, regular people's needs, and that is grassroots movements and social movements. We're driven by these two engines, essentially. The other reason I'm really excited about this is working with community volunteers. Some of them are in this room here. There's Dean. Ryan Stanley is absolutely amazing. Ramon Lopez. If you listen to our news and follow our news, you know their names. Absolutely amazing people. And they are volunteers. And then there is interns. We're an intern-fueled organization. They have actually provided the infrastructure and the fuel, the consistency that has been driving the news historically at WSLR. Most of those interns are new college students. And it's absolutely amazing to work with students who are eager to learn about journalism and who really pick up things and run with it in no time. It's thrilling to do this. We do have at any given time during term, when term is on, 2 or 3 interns. One of the future interns is sitting over there. That's Aria. So it's really great to work with interns. My not so hidden agenda here is trying to hear from all of you what we're doing right and what is missing in what we're doing. And the real agenda here is I want to drag you in. I want you to engage and help us cover the news. We're a quite work-intense little organization at this point because we try to reach beyond the airwaves. We're limited by low power FM. We cannot reach more than about 10,000 people a week with our spoken news. So we are expanding our website. All our spoken radio reports are now appearing on our website. So if you're a reader rather than a listener, please check wslr.org. All right, I think that's enough for now.
Thank you. Thank you, Johannes. Okay, we're a little bit behind on time. We get started a little bit late. So I'd like to see first, and we're going to probably keep this part short, if any of the panelists have questions for each other.
Dawn, I've been following the investigative reporting you've done. How do you run across these stories? One of the stories I'm really fascinated with is there's an ongoing effort by Manatee County to privatize the Manatee County Commission, or some of the commissioners, to privatize human resources in the county. Can you tell us how you ran across this?
Well, that story specifically came to my attention because in advance of the meetings, I review the agendas. I've never looked at a Sarasota County Commission agenda, but ours are rather lengthy. We have a lot of items, and we have a lot of items on consent. The difference with a consent agenda item is those are passed without any discussion. So if you don't go and look at what those are, you will never know they've happened, most likely. And I found that item on consent. There had been some prior discussion among commissioners about kind of this crazy idea of outsourcing HR function for a county government organization of, I think we're at 2,600 employees or more at this point, at roughly 12 departments. And when I read the attachments, the individual that they were approving to go under contract with to kind of begin the process towards letting that person business take over HR was a name I recognized, and it was somebody who was politically connected to many of our commissioners, and that concerned me. And so that was my starting point to begin learning more.
Thank you. And by the way, you can listen to Dawn and Mitch Malley on Sunday mornings on WSLR 96.5 talking about the hot stuff of Manatee County government.
Anyone else have a question? No? I just want to stress the importance of these topics because the local, the hyper-local, that's what we're interested in here, and that is what's missing. And one of the questions I would pose to you is, what do you think news organizations need right now? And I would say they need you. They need all of you as volunteers, as informed people who can cultivate relationships with reporters, even if you're not in the newsroom yourself, because the staffs of all newspapers have declined significantly, I mean, hugely. And when people pick up a paper and it looks thin, they say, well, they don't care about this or that anymore. That isn't it. They literally don't have the money to hire people to go to these 9-hour-long meetings. That used to be the standard assignment for a young reporter. Go cover the cops, hang around the police station, or go to the city council and the county commission. And that's where they learned a foundation, where they learned some institutional memory of the city or community, neighborhood. So then when something changed, they would know, they would make those connections. We had a reporter for the Tampa Bay Times, which was called the St. Petersburg Times back in the day, Martin Dykman, some of you might know his name. He was a editorial writer and reporter whose memory was phenomenal. Anybody you mentioned, he knew all about them, what they'd done, what office they'd been in, personal things about their lives, good and bad. And politicians were afraid of him because he knew about them. He had that kind of memory. And the sort of thing that happens now, the lying, the putting things over, that didn't used to happen to the same extent in journalism because politicians knew that somebody knew the truth. Somebody had that history. And now that's changed and it's opened up an unfortunate set of circumstances for us. Well, if there are no other questions of the panel from each other, I'd like to open this up a bit and see if anybody has questions about what was said directly. And if you do, please raise your hand and please start by telling us what brought you here.
How do we get to the point where people learn how to be critical thinkers again? Because I think that has a lot to do with the fall of journalism. People aren't really taught how to think critically. So yeah, there's a lot of, the opinions. Everybody has an opinion. I guess a lot of people think all opinions are equal. They are not. How do we kind of re-educate or educate people so that they can start to value local journalism?
I would just have one potential suggestion. When I lived in Albuquerque, which, many people think New Mexico is not part of the United States still. And there are in many ways, New Mexico is a little backward. But one of the things that they had in the high schools there, when I was there 20 years ago, was media literacy classes. And the need for them was not as great as, it was still important, but it was not as great as it is now, that there are so many sources and false sources and lies and so forth. But I think that's a great place to start cultivating young people who grow up with an awareness of how to tell when something is real, when something's not real, when something's subjective, when something's opinion, when something's news, how they can check out whether a video is a deep fake, whether a photograph has been photoshopped or whatever. So I would, I don't know how we would go about getting that into the Florida education curriculum at this point. But I certainly would think it would be a great thing for our young people.
Well, I'm not so skeptical about people's innate capacity of being critical thinkers. I think it's more an issue of getting the information. I see that with community volunteers I work with. As soon as they're confronted with the actual facts and statements and documents they are working through at a county commission or a city commission, they begin to sort it out. The only thing I like to keep reminding my fellow Americans here is, having lived in authoritarian countries, the people there are very used to read between the lines. They're looking at the silence. They're looking at what is not being said, and they're spinning their thoughts and their analysis from there. That's the only deficit I see here. So very often when I'm working with reporters, I keep telling them what is not being said, what is not on the agenda may be the news here.
That's really an important statement. Reading between the lines. I know 1990, I took a trip to Poland where I had to do some reporting. And I was amazed by the people who would sit for hours in front of the television. I didn't know what was being said, but people would just listen to these talking head news programs all day. And when I asked some people what this was about, they said, this is new to us. With the end of the Soviet era, for the first time, we have news. We can get this information. And I started thinking about how we take that for granted so much. And shortly after that, we began to have so much coming through the internet, and people complain about information overload, too much information. But following up on what Johannes just said, what information is it? What isn't? What aren't we being told? We're not being told a lot about what goes on locally. And I think that's the thing that is available to us if we look, and if we talk to others, and if we know how to find sources. as, as, there are sites where you can fact check things. You can find out if, again, if photos are real and so on. And that's super helpful. But I think that a lot of times it's just that people have turned away. They feel overwhelmed. And what they really need to be talking about is accessible, is right there. So I would encourage all of you.
I would agree with a lot of what's been said, particularly your comment about looking for what's not being discussed and what's not being said. And I think that is part of what I have learned in the last couple of years about the value of local news beyond just local information is local issues because, as I said earlier, there's not a real significant way to make a partisan slant on a lot of it, right? When it comes to our day-to-day lives and our infrastructure and our roads and our spending and our quality of life, most people, regardless whether you're a hyper partisan or a non-party person, a lot of times when the conversation starts and communication is happening, I've found that there's a lot of agreement. Everybody seems to really want for a lot of the same things. And so I think the value in local news also, in terms of your question about, getting back to we're having more critical thinking, is that those issues, because they are so tangible and not emotional, crazy red meat stuff, is something that, as you had mentioned, becomes more easily applicable, where they can begin to, where people, communities can begin to come around an issue together, and it becomes more clear when somebody's blowing smoke or intentionally leaving out important points from your elected officials or from the dais, or somebody's holding back information. So yes, and if I might also add, I share in your concern. When I'm on social media, I have a lot of people that I love that I know are super intelligent people who sometimes the things they share that they find on TikTok or YouTube and just take for granted that it is the God's honest truth is very concerning sometimes. So I share in your question, and yes.
I just want to add real quickly one more thing. I know it seems very basic, but what I've found, because my column is written in a very conversational style and it's pretty informal, we need to do a better job of explaining things to people. We can't just assume that they are going to understand that if these text amendments are passed that change the comprehensive plans, that could change development around the entire county. I mean, it's not enough to just state the news. In many cases, we need to explain it well enough so that someone who isn't really informed and who hasn't been really engaged may get engaged, because they now understand what these changes could possibly mean for them personally and for the quality of life here.
And to that point, if I may also add, I'm sorry if I'm talking too much. That is where citizens really play an important role, because when and if you begin to have interest in a local issue and decide, I think I'm going to write my county commissioners, or even better, I'm going to go address my board during a meeting. And then you share that with your friends in your community that you are doing so, or if you're, I don't know if Sarasota does like Manatee County, we have YouTube videos of our meetings, so you can literally share the YouTube video out and show what your comments are. And by you as citizens doing that, you are doing what she was just explaining about helping to break it down and digest it into a conversational thing, because there are a lot of moving parts and complex things that, and as Maria had said earlier, that are kind of growing and rolling things. I was not prepared. I thought that by doing this beat, and granted, it is a unique period of time in journalism, and especially in Manatee County government, but I was not prepared for how much I, at this point in time, would feel like I'm writing chapters of a story rather than reporting separate independent stories. Citizens need to read it, share it, subscribe to it, talk about it. That's my best.
We're using social media very proactively. Kathleen back there is the promoter and spreader of our news.
Great.
And also being more accessible, like I said. If there was someone you could email, someone who will respond, someone you can call who will respond, it makes a difference. It makes you feel connected to your local news source.
And it helps me. I'm the same way in that regard. I will talk to anybody sometimes, believe it or not, for hours on the phone. People I've never met before, but I learn so much by doing that. I learn so much. That is another unexpected benefit that I got of this, taking this role at the Bradenton Times, was I figured I'd learn quite a bit about civic processy and procedure and stuff. What I didn't anticipate was how much I would learn about just kind of the regular Joes of the community like me, and how much I would gain from that, and actually like my community more than I think I did prior to starting, despite some of our defects.
We have another question or comment? Okay, and please, everyone, please state, why you came.
So I'm John Miller. Julie Morris and I have a radio show on WSLR. It's not always news, but it's our changing environment. And I have about 3 different blogs. And I'm contributing to the decline of the Tribune because I provide content for free. So people that should be getting paid. Anyway, the reason I stood up here is that when Andrew Yang ran, aside from getting rid of the penny, Yang argued for government investment in local news by citing studies that connect increasing political polarization to the collapse of local reporting. If you believe in a vibrant democracy or even a functional democracy, Yang said, then you have to believe in local journalism. And he was proposing that the federal government should pay 535 journalists $400,000 for 4 years, $100,000 for 4 years to work in local communities doing journalism. That hasn't happened, but I'm wondering if any of you are aware of initiatives to fund or support local journalism that's not based on a subscription model, which is what we've sort of had with newspapers. So that's my question.
Well, media and government. So this institution is in part funded through tourism tax dollars. The Fogartyville is a cultural institution. I'm not going to share much more detail, but these tourism tax dollars might be gone in a few weeks from now because of politics. So while I would agree that government should play a role in sustaining information, the flow of information, I am skeptical in the current climate, political climate, how sustainable that would be. And I'm saying sustainable, I'm coming from a culture of public radio and TV in Germany. You literally pay taxes to get solid news. And it's been working well for 5, 6 decades. It's continuing to work well, but this is a very different kind of political environment. There is general agreement about the need of the state providing, not providing, but helping to provide independent news.
I think what we've seen more here locally is some of the foundations supporting local news. We have the Brancic Foundation put together, what's it called? The
Community
Commu-
collaborative, community news collaborative.
Collaborative, whereby they're funding an editor and several reporters to report local news that is available to any local news publication. So WSLR can use it, the Herald Tribune can use it, the Observer can use it. So that's a model that we're seeing. I don't know how many of you know that the Patterson Foundation has, for years, at least 5 years, because it was before I left full-time at the paper, has funded a reporter position at the newspaper to report on a specific area of coverage. And I will tell you, as a dinosaur print journalist, that when I first heard that they were doing that, I was completely appalled, because I thought they're buying this reporter to write, to write about the issues. But it's generally worked out okay. They've been hands off, and they just they pay this a salary that funds a reporter to to report in a certain area. So there could be pitfalls with that for sure, just in terms of keeping the conflict of interest out of it. But I think that those are the kind of things that we've been seeing, especially in Sarasota, which does have large foundations with a lot of money, who are interested in reviving local news.
Yes, the Branchick Foundation is really doing a good job, so kudos to them. And I've seen examples of this kind of reporting too that Carrie was mentioning. The Tampa Bay Times had a externally funded report on affordable housing in downtown St. Petersburg. It was a very extensive series that they could not have afforded to do on their own. So, and it was really top rate. We had another comment or question. Thank you.
I work on several boards to do with the environment and development. We are crying for young people to get involved. And when I read the Herald, I realize that a lot of the readership is older by the letters. I look up, I think, oh, this person might want to be working on environmental concerns, and I look them up and they're 80. So what can journalists, what can the media do? Maybe it's school board issues or whatever, to bring young people into the fold so that they begin to learn about the processes of government and how to be effective through organization, because we all know that works. We know that you come to a meeting and you have minutes and you have the whole formal thing. We know this is a method, but I think young people have been left out. So my question is, what can journalism do to bring young people?
Well, this institution is an educational institution, so we have a long history of bringing in interns, and that's not just college interns, it's also high school interns. I can only say they're self-goers as soon as they're put onto a task. One of my favorites was this new college student who did not grow up in the United States. She came to us having lived in Venezuela, in Ukraine, and currently she lives in Georgia, the Caucasus, Georgia. And she was assigned, one of her first assignments was to cover the Manatee County Commission. She picked up the ball and ran with it. She just liked the learning about the rules and the violating of rules. And she really thrived in this circumstance. So I don't think WSLR News has any problems attracting young people.
I can say that at the Catalyst, we have had some very strong reporting on county government, on, for example, the decision fairly recently to defund the Library Association, both the state and federal, for ideological reasons. We had a reporter go to the meeting and pay very close attention and do a good job of explaining, which is something that Carrie brought up, to teach people how to explain to other people what they're finding out. That's not so easy. It's much more easy to make an assumption that people know what you're talking about. And if they don't know, they're likely not to pursue the story to the end because you've already lost them. So I think, I think there is an interest, but providing opportunities is a thing, more internships, and at the high school level as well. A lot of schools, both high schools and colleges, are having trouble keeping their journalism programs going for obvious reasons. There's a decline in jobs in journalism, and that's one reason. There are also ideological concerns in some areas. So, being strong about that, encouraging that is really the future, because without young reporters, we really won't have any reporters. So,
I can say one thing that I have witnessed at the Bradenton Times. In Manatee County, somewhat recently, we had a comprehensive plan text amendment that related to wetland buffers. Our local county board decided they would like to defer regulations to state oversight rather than having any local say over buffer requirements. And I'm just going to speak broadly. If you catch me after and you want to know what a buffer is or any of that, I'm happy to chat about it. But there were, and this is not the only issue where I've seen this, and I know I've seen it also at Sarasota County Commission meetings. There were several youth who got engaged on that issue. One young man, I believe he's 15 years old. His name is Bryce Claypool. I hope I'm saying that right. He has started a group of youth who are concerned about the environment. My editor invited him onto the podcast. He sat with my editor for an hour and talked about what he knows and why he thinks it matters and why he thinks more youth should think it matters and what it means for the future. We've also had student writers submit guest op-eds in writing and letters to the editor, which is something that we'll publish from just about anybody, even if we don't agree, provided it's respectful. So that, I think, is one thing that I know we're doing at the Bradenton Times, but we're pretty small operations, so.
I think, there's no question that my readership is probably average age 65. But one thing I try to do as much as I can is write about when I see youth are doing something in the community that's activating the community or getting involved, to give them, to showcase them. Recently I wrote about a new nonprofit called the Sea Alliance, which was started by Xander Moritz, who's the young man from Pineview who has gone viral over his Bridget Ziegler comments. And it's an incredible new organization that just received the largest philanthropic donation ever to a youth nonprofit in the world, not in the country, in the world. They got over $1 million as an initial funding. And their main goal is not only providing, they have a storefront on Orange Avenue, but not only providing a place for students to come and debate and discuss and talk, but also educating them about voting and local government and how to present at a local school board meeting. So just giving them more visibility in the paper, I think, is something that I can do.
yeah, that alliance is a very exciting thing. I'm from a small town that still has to this day town hall meetings where you go and debate issues and vote on them. And, the power of that, of bringing people together in one place, where they can have the kind of interaction that they're having there or that we can have here is just so powerful. And it breaks through that idea of each person sitting alone in front of their computer, getting news and maybe not being able, somebody mentioned, being surprised, you did, Dawn, about otherwise smart people sharing weird things on the internet. Well, part of that comes from not being able to see it with other people. And somebody says, that's ridiculous. That person is not there. The person who used to watch the nightly news together, as a family or something. So anything we can do to counter that in person is really good. Do we have any other questions or comments?
Jim Lample, downtown city resident, longtime supporter of this station. Do you think that the loss of subscribers and the lack of popularity for legitimate journalism is due more that more and more Americans want to be entertained and they want to do the hard work to keep this democracy going?
I would say yes, and I would say that in many cases with print journalism transitioning to digital journalism, that we have fueled that appetite for entertainment because newspapers are looking to get people to click on their websites, and so they know if they have certain celebrities' names in the headlines or it's some pop culture story, it's going to get more clicks. And so I think, that we have enabled that to some degree.
All right, I have, it's a question of the audience really, but we'll have you answer it because probably the largest consumers of media are you guys because you're looking at it every day, right? But, one of the purposes of this event is to try to get some feedback on where are the gaps in local coverage, right? So if you all don't want to come to the microphone, we'd love to have you write them down, but I bet you all have answers to those questions too. So I will ask our panelists, where do you find the gaps in our local media coverage, and any ideas about how we fill them?
Well, from my perspective at the Bradenton Times, and again, it's different, I think, than maybe the Sarasota Herald Tribune or the Bradenton Herald. Although I have seen for myself the shrinkage and pulling back of resources. But I think this goes to the question that came before that as well about, do you think that Americans are more interested in being entertained? I don't know for sure, but I suspect that it's not a conscious choice toward that. That over time, distractions and the concentration of, as I was saying earlier, national news issues and how hyper-partisan they've become, and these hot button debates where residents tend to get really angry with each other are a big distraction that takes our focus away for a time that maybe we have over time lost sight of what's really important in terms of what we should be really focusing and paying attention and engaging on, which I would argue is our local issues and our local government. I think for us at the Bradenton Times, hoping that I'm not speaking out of turn for my publisher or my editor, but I think that what's missing is more resource and more support because of that full circle. We don't require subscriptions, we don't have paywalls, but we do, because we are self-funded, we do ask for voluntary subscriptions. I am compensated for what I do there, as is my editor. But it takes a lot of time. It takes a lot of energy and financial resource. And I would love to see the Bradenton Times have kind of what you were speaking of back in the day, where a paper would have city beat and somebody who's going to every city meeting and every school board meeting and every county meeting, and there's just no way we could do that at this point in time. So I recognize the void that we have at the Bradenton Times, and I'm grateful for the other local papers, and thank you for WSLR beginning to put some people over into the county focus too, because as I think it was you were saying earlier, it is really helpful to know that some things are being covered by other public, even though it's not organized or conscious teamwork, it ends up kind of being this collective quilt of everybody kind of catching everything in the net over time as you grow. And so I wish that there was a way to have more of that. I don't know what the answer is in terms of, funding and resources, but I think that's where things are missed the most, is there's just so much going on. And Sarasota and Manatee County are not small communities with small budgets or small matters happening.
Gaps.
Mm-hmm.
There are three pet peeves of mine. One is what Dawn mentioned, when there is no public pushback on something, bad things happen. Bradenton City Hall. The city of Bradenton literally is selling City Hall to a developer. There has been fairly little pushback to it, and so the coverage so far has been just a factual chronicling of what the city council is doing. But there are big questions out there. Why are we doing this? What is in it for residents of Bradenton? And who is gaining and profiting from this? So big questions are not answered by just chronicling whatever the city council is doing. Pet peeve number 2, everything relating to economics. The traditional presentation of economics in daily newspapers is business. We do not have an economics section, we have a business section. And it's usually a business section that responds to the needs of business owners and investors. We have the stock page, we have everything there reported from an investor's or business owner's standpoint rather than an employee's, a worker's, or a consumer's standpoint. So that's another big gap. Thirdly, media, as we tend to follow the noise. And that's again speaking to what is not being said and what is not being covered. Just one example, right now at the school board that is still going on, the school board meeting in Sarasota, the big issue is Bridget Ziegler. And granted, it is an important issue given the current constellation of politics, but the one thing the school board does not have on the agenda other than the resignation of Bridget Ziegler is vouchers, school vouchers, privatization. The public school system in Sarasota is beginning to bleed students to private schools, and this is going to affect everything else. It's not on the agenda. It has not been discussed. It's not being seriously discussed at this point.
And there are reasons for that. And so I think looking into those reasons, putting them out there is really an important opportunity for those of you who are concerned with what happens to the schools, and I think we all are. In the past, in Pinellas County, whenever they had on the ballot, to raise a penny for the schools, it always passed. And people would say, well, that's surprising because it's mostly older people who are voting and they don't have kids in the schools. Well, that's not the point. It's that people understood the value of public education, both for themselves, for their families, even if they never had kids. They understood that. That seems to be, I don't think disappearing, but it's eroding from under us. And people are not speaking out about it and what it means. So,
Maria, can I add one thing in terms of when we're talking about gaps? And this is kind of specific to this year, and what I've seen happen at the Herald Tribune over the years. I think one of the places where we really fall down is not supplying community members and voters with adequate and accurate information about the candidates. The paper no longer does endorsements, which were helpful to some people, but at the very least, I feel like it is the newspaper's duty to make sure that the electorate is as informed as they can be so they can make educated decisions about their votes. And I think that's an area that I've seen, at least at the Herald Tribune, be very neglected.
I can say as a person who used to do that work when I was an editorial writer, in an election year, we'd be given a notebook that was literally this thick, a binder with every single candidate and all of their statements, and most of them would come in and speak to the editorial board. It was very time consuming. And there were 9 of us on the board at that time, and we would all have certain candidates that we had to follow, write up about. So when the Tampa Bay Times gave its endorsement of a candidate, it was based on a lot of information that had been collected over months. And that just doesn't happen anymore. Again, because they don't have the people to do it.
Yeah, I mean, when I came to the Herald Tribune, it wasn't that long ago, it was 13 years ago, there were 6 people on the editorial board. There is no editorial board anymore. There is one person who's the opinion editor, who doesn't write, very, very rarely writes an editorial speaking as the voice of the Herald Tribune. Usually he's writing personal editorials. We have no publisher. We have no editorial board. That's why all these things have fallen by the wayside. But I think that's a real disservice to the community. The paper does have a new executive editor. He was appointed about a month ago. His name is Mark Rochester. I have not met him, so I can't really tell you anything. He did have an editorial in Sunday's paper talking about his aspirations for what he wants to do with the paper. He wants to do a lot. He comes from an investigative journalism background. He wants to do a lot more investigative work, and he also mentioned more intense coverage of local government. And it all sounds good, and I hope it all comes to fruition.
Hi, I'm Gene Etzinger. I'm a retired newspaper editor. I've worked for some big papers, the Chicago Tribune, the Miami Herald, the Associated Press. I also lived in Brazil for a while and in the Caribbean for 18 years. I've been in Sarasota for 22 years. Coming to the meeting tonight, I had 3 things in my past in my mind. One was that when I was in college majoring in journalism, we had a course about 4 different kinds of media, and one was the Soviet Union, which the big government controlled everything that was put out to people. Another was banana republics, where each political party or partisan had their own newspaper, and people read the one they wanted to read. And then there was the United States, which had independent, every viewpoint represented, et cetera, et cetera. Well, things have changed so much today, and what I see today, it's not newspapers, but more social media. It's more the banana republic. People are picking and choosing what news they want to get. It's fed to them what they already believe. They don't want to hear anything else. And if they do peripherally hear about something else, they don't believe it, they reject it, which doesn't relate so much to local coverage, except the problem I'm not seeing addressed here is not so much what's being reported or how it's being reported, but who tunes in. And you've mentioned the senior citizens here obviously are still attuned to media. Young people, and if they're in the right school and the right teacher, they'll be oriented toward that. I personally think that media literacy should start in preschool. If it did, we'd be better off. I don't think it's going to happen, but I think that's what would really change things. I'm concerned about the people who are in between, the people in their 30s, their 40s, the ones that are the really strong partisans right now who are hating each other. And how do we get those people to tune into what they really need to understand?
My answer for that would be to give them some information about issues that matter to them on a very local level. As Dawn said so well, you know, when you get out and drive on the street, what condition is the street in? When you see these puddles and you hear vaguely about, you know, sea level rise, what is that actually about and how does it affect you? The school issues, people in their 30s and 40s have kids in school. And so these issues should be of primary interest to them. No pun intended.
Developer influence on the local and county level.
Okay,
Can I speak to that?
yes. All right.
But, okay,
All right.
well, I, first of all, I don't necessarily know in the state of Florida how unique we are, although we are trying to be pretty special, I think. To what was being said about conversations and reporting and citizens attending when they are available, candidate forums, you have to understand who's running for your elected offices, and why are they running, and who's funding their campaign, and where do you find that information. I think that is the I guess that's the simplest. Simple in terms of basic, but complicated in terms of getting there, is knowing who your elected officials are and learning about how to know what's driving them, who's funding them, and then staying engaged past the point that where the person you voted for, it's like, oh, I really believed in that person, so I don't have to worry about it anymore. They got this covered, and then you look away, and that's a problem, I think.
Development, you know, I'm going to do a little poll. How many of you are concerned about something about development in your local neighborhood? I certainly am.
Practically
You know,
everyone.
I live near downtown St. Pete, and they're currently erecting a 40-something tower residential building right in the center of downtown. It's going to be the tallest building on the west coast of Florida. It's horrific. And it's not going to benefit any of the local people because all of these condos start at $1 million something and they're bought by investors. We know that, but you know, what can we do about it? One thing we can do about it is not that building, that's done. There was a big fight over it and the city, you know, people didn't want it lost. But it's just one of many such things. And so I think we can talk to our neighbors. Who else would like to share something about development that they think really needs to be reported on more or looked into more?
That's a complex question. I would suggest that part of it is that there has been a transition over time in Sarasota County from about 2011, where the developers came back in force after they were starved by the crash of 2007 and 2008. And when they came back, they decided, we're going to control this board, and they do. As such, the incentive to get the staff to change little procedures, and I'll give you an example. And Carrie, you just wrote about this, the workshops, the neighborhood workshops, which used to be person only, in person. Anybody could go and look closely at the plans, ask all the questions. Now it's all online. And half the time, you don't even know what they're saying because you can't see the images, you can't see the people. It's basically an alienated process. So it's as if the people were no longer part of the process.
We're soaking it up. Keep going.
Yes.
Yeah, this is great.
I will add to that the workshops that are in person don't allow people to give feedback and let other people hear it a lot of times. It's just this presentation, and then if you want to give feedback, you write it down and send it in. And so there's no opportunity for people to hear what other people's concerns are and respond to it. So even for ones that are in person, they have manipulated it. This is mostly for city type workshops that I've been to. I'm not sure about the county, but
Are you referring to Sarasota, just out of curiosity?
Sarasota,
This is very interesting because what both of you had just shared, I could have sworn you were speaking about Manatee County government.
I actually don't think there has been an in-person neighborhood workshop since the county commission voted last fall to not bring them back, not make them mandatory for developers. They said they could, but they also said they could just also keep it online. And as far as I know, not a single developer has offered to do one in person since then.
I will share a point of frustration that I've heard quite a bit among residents to what both of you have just shared, is that our county commission used to allow for call-in public comment. So if you wanted to provide comment during the county commission meeting, you could do that by phone from work, home, wherever, to make it more accessible to give some feedback. Our previous chair, who is still a county commissioner, he's up for re-election now, he unilaterally just showed up to a meeting one day, a day where there was going to be a very contentious development item on the agenda, and just walked in and said, you know what? That whole thing with the call-in comments, that's kind of like a leftover pandemic thing, and we don't infringe on people's liberties. We don't have more restrictions around here, so we're going to get rid of that because we've gotten rid of all COVID things around here. And that was it. It was gone. What is frustrating still to citizens, now I hear from a lot of citizens who have reached out both to me and gone to public meetings and said, bring it back. It's not a restriction. It's provided us more access regardless of the reason. If you want to hear from the public, prove it. But what's amazing and what is a point of contention is that just as you described with community meetings, those are still being done online. Those are being done by Zoom. Those are not being done in person. And so we have a lot of residents who are saying, how come they're saying those protocols all need to end that came in during the time of the pandemic, but where it matters, we can't get an in-person meeting? So I don't have an answer to that, just thought I would share.
Let me just say that to me, the key words in what Don just said are up for reelection. And, we need to have more information, the information that you all know, that you've gathered, put out to voters so that people can say, do I want the person who took away my right to speak face-to-face to somebody? Most people are going to say no, but they're not terribly aware of this. So even with big issues like development, elected people are making these decisions. And it's possible to unelect them, but only with the right information.
I would like to throw a question into the room. The flip side of overdevelopment is luxury development.
Yes.
It is destroying existing housing that is affordable, and it is not being replaced with housing that is affordable. So the flip side of it is the affordable housing crisis. I was wondering how you see this. I'm personally a little frustrated because we cover a lot about the neighborhood resistance against overdevelopment and luxury development, but we rarely get to talk about what we need, affordable housing. I'm wondering how you see this and how you think we could cover this.
Hold on.
One of the things that I would really like to know with the luxury housing, these high rises going up and these communities, these buildings, are they selling? Because if they're selling, that's a problem, right? It means like the people that are moving in are not the workers or not the, middle class people. So I would love to see a story which really looks at who's buying these, are they selling at a, good rate?
So this is a subject that's intimately familiar to me. The inability to purchase a home. It's out of my comfort zone. Oh my God. Almost bought a home a couple years ago, and the appraiser faked it. Second one faked it. I spoke with a lot of people, and similar stories. I am looking around me at the community. I'm from Sarasota. I grew up here. My community is getting ripped apart by this issue. People I know personally are being forced out of the state. My family is going to exit soon. I work in the building industry, which is the ironic part about this. And the developers who are responsible and connected to most of the political figures, the larger developers who are unconscionable, most of the people in the building industry trash talk them too. Most builders are mom and pop organizations, but there are trade magazines talking about the build for rent market. There is huge push for investors to develop this area of investment. There's collectives forming, and I see articles from different investment blogs that I follow, the building articles that I follow, and I think it's really going to develop a substantial bubble burst, and I don't know the nature of it. Everyone you read who is expert on the subject appears to have a different opinion, sometimes within the same edition of the magazine. So I don't know. They are selling, I'll tell you that. I have seen a lot of builders literally constructing whole houses just for Airbnb, luxury houses. An article I saw recently was 18% of the houses in Sarasota are for Airbnb. So we have so many factors. I think a good way to cover it would be, well, what are the actual factors that are causing the dissolution of communities? And that is what's happening.
One of the things that I would really like to know with the luxury housing, these high rises going up and these communities, these buildings, are they selling? Because if they're selling, that's a problem, right? It means like the people that are moving in are not the workers or not the, middle class people. So I would love to see a story which really looks at who's buying these, are they selling at a, a good rate?
So this is a subject that's intimately familiar to me. The inability to purchase a home. It's out of my comfort zone. Oh my God. Almost bought a home a couple years ago, and the appraiser faked it. Second one faked it. I spoke with a lot of people, and similar stories. I am looking around me at the community. I'm from Sarasota. I grew up here. My community is getting ripped apart by this issue. People I know personally are being forced out of the state. My family is going to exit soon. I work in the building industry, which is the ironic part about this. And the developers who are responsible and connected to most of the political figures, the larger developers who are unconscionable, most of the people in the building industry trash talk them too. Most builders are mom and pop organizations, but there are trade magazines talking about the build for rent market. There is huge push for investors to develop this area of investment. There's collectives forming, and I see articles from different investment blogs that I follow, the building articles that I follow, and I think it's really going to develop a substantial bubble burst, and I don't know the nature of it. Everyone you read who is expert on the subject appears to have a different opinion, sometimes within the same edition of the magazine. So I don't know. They are selling, I'll tell you that. I have seen a lot of builders literally constructing whole houses just for Airbnb, luxury houses. An article I saw recently was 18% of the houses in Sarasota are for Airbnb. So So we have so many factors. I think a good way to cover it would be, well, what are the actual factors that are causing the dissolution of communities? And that is what's happening.
Thank you.
Yes, very good.
I would just say, firstly, you're all doing a wonderful job in terms of reporting. As a person that's busy, has many obligations, like, you know, a lot of us do, I should do my duty and be a better informed citizen. People don't have the time or that education distraction, as you talked about. Just over-explain it to us would be my sole request, especially, you know, the development side. People they don't see it to the end. They don't think it through. They don't think about, well, why isn't it bad that I can't say what I'm thinking at a meeting? And again, we all know that on some level, but just over-explain it. Good example of listening to our changing environment, talking about water quality and then reducing the wetlands. And until Dr. Tierney with the Suncoast Waterkeeper explained, like, they're going to put more chemicals in the water. Yes, it'll still be safe to drink, but you won't want to drink it. And that's why it's, you know, you have to really drill down 2 or 3 layers to get at it.
Literally drill down.
Yeah.
In terms of the development issue, I think we have to really flip the coin and change the narrative and focus more on the reality of, it's not that people don't want to work here in Sarasota, okay? It's they can't afford to live here to be able to work in it. I know there have been articles, but maybe there has to be a major push or a concerted, I don't know, you know, group and have a bombardment of similar related articles to help people understand it more. Also in the, you know, the different communities, get people in the community to get involved. I know that I would not be able to live here, and I won't be once my mom's gone because she pays the rent, you know, and I'll have to leave. And so it's hard because I know a lot of people in a similar situation like you. And I think maybe if there was a way to focus more on that aspect of it to really educate people more, that would help a lot. And also maybe to get people mobilized in all the communities. And I'm sure it's been tried, so maybe it's a question of thinking outside of the box and figuring out a new way to try to get people involved.
If I may, in relation to this topic about affordable housing, a different aspect of that is the issue of insurance. And it is out in the news. What I'm finding interesting so far is that I'm not hearing enough of different models that do exist elsewhere. And it sounds like, okay, the state has to somehow make this affordable, but there's no conversation about the fact of the push to privatize and the fact that in the end, the state still has to pay, and the state is us. So thinking about other ways of thinking about ways in which we protect ourselves and support each other in moments of environmental harms, like the hurricanes, et cetera, and being able to support each other without that necessarily implying that we are forced to put in money into the pockets of the folks who invest in the
Gruder's
in the
friends.
industry.
Yeah.
Thank you. So I think explaining more of that and providing examples of how other places do it would be helpful.
I think that's a great point, Sarah. That kind of refers back to what I had said before about what they call solutions journalism, so that you don't just point out, oh, we have a terrible problem here with overdevelopment. We try to look at other communities and what they've done and how they have handled the same issue, maybe better than we have. And you know, unfortunately, that's a labor-intensive thing and it's a resource-intensive thing, and so that's why it doesn't get done more often. But I think you're right that you have to not only get people completely depressed about what's happening, you have to give them some hope that there is a solution.
I think with the housing issue, you know, there's something called workforce housing. And the mayor of St. Petersburg made that one of his campaign issues, and he's doing his best to follow through on it. He's not making the progress that he would like to make, but that it's out there. I mean, workforce housing has become a popular term, a term that most people are familiar with, and a goal, whereas a few years ago it wasn't. And so I think, there are some models, and providing examples, again, success stories, is really, really important, because we see affordable housing disappearing everywhere. And this issue of, you can't afford to live where you work is just so critical. But workforce housing, you can work and you can live, is something that I think cities can aspire to.
So, John and I have for a long time, been listeners to public radio. And there used to be, during the legislative session, a capital report every evening. And it was telling you what was going on in the Capitol, in the legislature that particular day. And I really missed that. It went away. And so now what I subscribe to is something called Seeking Rents. Jason Garcia is the investigative reporter. And
Big shout out. Great guy.
Yeah, he's really, really good. And what he focuses on is how corporate and business interests are pushing legislation, a lot of it coming from this American Legislative, ALEC is the acronym, and they feed model legislation to state legislators, and then they become law in Florida. And he focuses on that, how this is the concept, the economic concept of private parties seeking government action in order to benefit their industry. And so seeking rents, and I think that's really, and then locally, Sarasota News Leader does really, really in-depth covering of the Sarasota County Commission, and it's really inexpensive to subscribe. I think it's like $30 a year or something like that. And I really value that. Gives me a lot of background on what's going on in the county commission in Sarasota County.
We're actually subscribing to the Sarasota News Leader. They're lead providers for us.
Yeah, great. So shout out for both of those, Seeking Rents and Sarasota News Leader. But for me, the issue that I wish got more local attention is the climate crisis. Rising sea level, hot summers, people who are working outdoors in the summer and they don't have access to water or shade or rest periods. All of this, it's really, and more, I mean, the hurricane intensity is part of what's causing our insurance rates to be so high. And, it's just, that whole realm of things I think is really, really important and doesn't get enough local focus.
Yes, thank you.
That's a really important subject that citizen journalists can pick up on almost anywhere. A very powerful story we had in the Catalyst a few years ago had to do with a hurricane, and one of the reporters saw that people coming from other states were sleeping in their trucks in a big parking lot. And that turned out to be a really important story. It was compelling. They came to help, but they were not, and they were, some of them were in the parking lot of a big hotel. And so, the issue is here, why can't these people reach out and help when people have come and volunteered to do this work? This happens a lot. And there are all sorts of issues having to do with storms, crises, and so on, that we see individually the effects I mentioned earlier about people who talk about sea level rise. That's an issue in my neighborhood in St. Petersburg. People talk about it all the time, but we don't see that much reporting on it unless something really bad happens. So I think when the conversation gets going among people like yourselves, that's the opportunity to compare notes and to bring it to somebody like Dawn or Carrie or Johannes, who can actually put the word out there, move it to the next level. So I hope all of you are ready to do that, and we want to help.
Bring it to us, and can I plug quickly? Engage with us. We are offering a 1-month free workshop for community journalism. So everything I've heard here, I would love in our newsroom. So if you feel like you have a little bit of excess energy, consider taking that workshop. It's about the tools of the trade, journalism, and particularly radio news. 4 Saturday mornings in February. It's not much more than an hour each Saturday. The outcome of it for each participant will be producing a report for WSLR News. So if you're interested in that, please apply. It's wslr.org, top of the page, Community Journalism Workshop. Click on that and please let me hear from you.
And also, as I said, my email and phone number are on every column I write. Some of my best columns have come from tips from readers, so please feel free to, call me or write me with any ideas you might have.
Thank you so much for joining us. It really means a lot. Your time means a lot to us. And that you're willing to come out and participate in this and offer ideas, I think is important. And it's like Dawn said, communication is the key. And the other issue that she brought up can be a tricky one. It's getting harder to communicate with people who have really different views. Some of the common courtesy that used to be around that has disappeared. But I think she hit on something important when she said, have guardrails, set the terms of the discussion. We have an issue in common, whether it's the lack of affordable housing and in particular environmental issue, overdevelopment in our neighborhood or our city, schools. People have, if it can just be tied to that concern, I think there can be a real concentration of eyes and ears on what's actually happening and ability to bring that together in a way that's going to make a difference. So thanks to all of you.